In this document, and I promise, whiz through it. When we were engaged, one among the many things we were tasked with was a very loosely defined, help us leverage the sales tax commission dollars. At that point in time, that was pretty much the statement. It had nothing to do with any particular projects, certainly not the Tyler grant. It was just, there's money available that we collect every month, and we would like to, if possible, leverage those dollars to maximize the spending effect. Starting in October, November of 2015, we started inviting investment banking firms to come to Jackson and make presentations. And this was very informal. The directions were very loose. It was basically, are there any refinancing opportunities? Are there any new money uses that the city may be able to utilize? And last, what do you think we should do with the sales tax leverage? So we invited about 15 firms. 11 came down. It was a mixture of local firms, regional, Wall Street, minority-owned, women-owned, you name it, we invited it. Most came. Very literally, of the 11 that came, 10 presented with respect to the sales tax the exact same idea, and that was a traditional bond issue. The 11th firm presented what's called in banking terms a direct placement, which means that they utilize, this particular firm utilizes their money instead of selling bonds to investors. They utilize their money, their balance sheet, to fund projects. And I'm going to do this for a few minutes, compare a traditional bond issue with what's been presented, and tell you why we made the recommendation that we did. In a traditional bond issue, let's say the number is $80 million. At this point, it's about 60% of that. But bond transaction closes, there's a pot of money, $80 million, for, in this case, the city to spend with very little checks and balances. The checks and balances are primarily from a legal standpoint. Bond counsel has to make sure, and in this case, the city would have to stipulate on an annual basis that the funds have been utilized for legal purposes. In the transaction which this particular bank proposed, as the mayor-elect said, it's more of a line of credit. So funds have been approved up to a certain amount, and there are numerous conditions which have to be met before one penny can be drawn down upon. And I want to say, and this again is why I am very pleased to have this opportunity to speak directly to you. One of the first conditions that the bank required, and we have since fine-tuned, is that no money can be spent on projects which have not been approved by the Sales Tax Commission. That's first and foremost. Also, some of the others were City Council has to have approved any particular draws. What we went back and added as a way of shoring up, quite frankly, everybody's position, the Sales Tax Commission's position, the bank's position, and even though they might not agree with it, the city's position, is that there are reporting requirements in place. So just as you want to receive reports, what we have suggested is that the bank request reports as well. The bank is, for obvious reasons, less concerned with the back end of the project. They're very concerned with the front end, that they have been properly approved. They're relying on the Sales Tax Commission to do the front end part, but they also want to know that their money is being utilized. So there are a couple of other conditions that were either included in the initial term sheet, or we've kind of said, you know, you should look at this, you should look at that, etc. Once things came to a halt, our firm became concerned that we were making the best recommendation with the best available information. So we did some things that we don't typically do. We met with the US DOT and the Highway Administration and MDOT because there were obviously concerns about what exactly is the process. So we wanted to make sure that, again, we take the SEC very seriously, that we understood what the federal requirements were, what the state requirements were, and what the city's requirements were. So it is our understanding, as has been said earlier, that the federal requirements are very different from the city's requirements. And with that in mind, and with some other things in mind, we went back to the bank and said we might have to do things differently. Nick Bryant, who's sitting here, is our analyst, and Nick has worked with the Public Works Department to really fine-tune what was initially presented to the bank. At this point, we think that the to-be borrowed amount is much less than $80 million. We think for several reasons that it's closer to 49.50. And as the Mary said earlier, if the first draw needs to be $10 million, then that's the first draw. In terms of the cost of capital and interest rate, because this is, and I promise not to get into the weeds, because this is a short-term transaction, the interest rate scale that's used is different than it would be for a long-term transaction. And in real-world terms, that means that it's a lot less. So on a long-term basis, let's say the average interest rate for this transaction might be 5%. What the bank has proposed is less than 2%. So it's not free money by any stretch. There's truly no such thing. But what it is an opportunity for, and this is sum total of why we made the recommendation that we did, is an opportunity for the city to borrow what's needed, exactly when it's needed, and on a cost-efficient basis.
Robbie, so the rate would be 70% of 30-day LIBOR plus the spread?
Right.
So it's a floating rate. So y'all are proposing that the city borrow $40–50 million on a floating rate basis?
Yeah, right now, and that's a good question, and you haven't stated your concern, but I know what it is. What happens if the rate goes above a certain point and it becomes cost prohibitive?
5 years ago, LIBOR was at 5.
Yeah, and right now it's at 1.
Yeah. Last year it was at 0.5.
Actually, you're right.
What happens at the end of 2 years?
At the end of
Does that thing roll over into a more traditional?
What the bank,
however much you borrowed rolls
Right.
into a fixed. Does that roll into a fixed term rate at that point?
what the bank would like to have happen is that it would roll into a fixed term instrument.
So you've drawn down $47,283,000. We're paying XYZ rate, and we said that's all we're going to borrow. And this 2 year comes up, they just turn it into a 20-year note or whatever.
Whatever is left, what protects
Yeah.
the city and the sales tax commission is to tie it to whatever's left on the life of
But
the,
it's got that kind of time frame, and that pays it out.
Right.
And that would be at whatever
the then current rate is.
is it calculated the same way?
No, it would be a longer term rate.
It'd be based on like whatever municipal bond rate.
Right, that's exactly right.
Would you go back to his question?
Yes. His question is a good question.
I know it is, that's why I'm waiting on the answer.
So there are certain things that we can negotiate into the transaction to put a cap on that rate. But one of the things that I would recommend, the bank has already proposed, and that's that if rates rise above a certain point prior to the 2 year period, you just refinance it then, rather than waiting. You don't lose anything by doing it.
Can you stop borrowing?
You can, well, that's another good question. Let me finish this
Okay.
one. Let's say that right now we think the rate would be about 1.6% on the funds that are drawn down. If we see it approaching, so that's on one hand. On the long-term fix out, let's say that we think that takeout rate might be 4.5. If it goes, as it approaches 1.6 or 2% as a threshold, we would start saying, as the advisor, we need to consider other options.
Let's spin it off into another instrument.
Right, or put some type of cap on it. Now, what the bank has done again is said, you know, if we see rates rising, because the last thing they want, first and foremost, they do want to make money, but they don't want a client who can't afford to pay them back. Because everybody loses then. So there are mechanisms that can be structured in place to to protect the city/sales tax commission against that. And that's what we would recommend.
Man.
I agree that the bank wants a client that can pay the money back.
Right.
Unless it sees a client that might be coming in the money sometime in the near future and they see that they can take more of that. Right?
That is a correct statement.
Yeah.
That is a very correct statement. Yeah.
I mean,
Go ahead.
no.
If you borrowed $50 million
Mm-hmm.
and it was 2 years from now, and the rates are where you kind of think they're going to be 2 years from now, and there's 15 years left on the 1% money, what's that mean annually in a round number about what that $50 million over 15 years at that rate would be coming out of the 1%?
I'm going to defer to my
I know
analyst.
you were. That's why I actually looked over there. And I don't need an exact number, I'm just wondering, is it 2 million or 20 million?
You talking about for annually, your annual debt
Yeah,
service payments?
your annual,
It'd be closer to about 2.5 million.
be about 2.5
But the
million.
important thing also is that you have to remember that you're gonna have an account balance at the end of this 2 years, and you have the option to apply any of that to pay down, so you don't have to borrow more money than you feel comfortable with.
Yeah, okay,
But wait, the debt service on $50 million termed out over 15 years, that's going to be more like
that's gonna be more than
5
2.5.
Well, you have your $15 million that is going to be from the Tiger Grant reimbursement that is going to be applied to pay that down.
Wait. How does that get reimbursed?
That's going to be reimbursed by MDOT and the Federal Highway
How much are
Administration.
you figuring that this $40 million is gonna spend on Tiger Grant?
We did not mean to slip into.
Yeah, I apologize.
The net cost of the city of the Tiger Grant over the next 2 years is gonna be $15 million.
What Nick was alluding to is that one of the requirements that the bank has is, as we were beginning to, well, they're finishing their due diligence process, and the subject came up of utilizing some of the leverage dollars for Tiger Grant purposes. This particular bank does a lot of work with DOT. And they said to us, we know that the city will receive X% reimbursement. So rather, their thoughts, oddly enough, were very much in line with yours. What they said was, rather than pay interest on funds which you have received reimbursement for, send us that money back as you receive it from the feds, and that lowers the total borrowing amount.
So let me understand, because this makes a big difference. If we're talking about a $49 million deal, and you're putting all the Tiger Grant there, but you're counting on the $19 million of the feds coming back and being paid off, you're really just talking about borrowing $30 million.
At the end of the day, that's correct.
So, because what you're proposing in this is, you're gonna borrow the whole Tiger Grant money, 19, and at the end of 2 years, giving that back to them, so the net money available to the city, of which 15 million of it's got to go into the city's match if we do it under this project, if we don't do something different to fund Tiger Grant. But I mean, so that's how you get down to 2.5 or 3 million, because you're gonna pay that $19 million back rather than spend it on something else.
It's a line of credit.
Right.
Floating rate, line of credit. So Rodney, if we have $50 million now that came due today on they termed that out over 20 years, what would the rate be today? Just
If it were long-term, 20 years?
Yeah.
On average, between 4.5% and or so percent.
Is that based like on the treasury rate, or what's the?
It's based on two things. It's based on a municipal market scale. You might hear bankers use the term MMD scale, which is municipal market data. And it's also based on the underlying credit of the City of Jackson's water and sewer fund. And to a lesser extent, but important extent, the sales tax credit is very technically a different credit than the city's GO bonds and the water and sewer bonds. The downside is that it's new. The collection rate is stable, which is good. It's not great, you want it to grow, but it's very stable. So that is right around the 50-50 mark as a mitigating factor on if the city were to borrow in the traditional market using the sales tax.
Would there be a way to lock in a rate now, like for 2 years from now, even if it's based on like a benchmark plus?
You would have to do it, well, it's always possible.
What would it cost?
And that's the problem.
Yeah, what would it cost you to do that? You're taking the risk out. Yeah.
Exactly, because the bank
Well, if
would,
we get a benchmark plus a spread, we're just
Yeah,
agreeing
but
on
I
the
mean,
spread.
You
you're gonna
pay
pay
too
for it.
much,
You're gonna
right.
pay, you're gonna pay to get it.
if you were going to do that, what we would recommend is that you just borrow on a long-term basis now. But either way, you pay too much because the bank is betting against you on what the interest rates are going to do.
So, as I stated, going into this portion of the discussion, that you know, Kipling Jones has been, you know, very gracious with their time to explain this to me and tell me everything that's happened.
Thank you.
And I asked you the question when we met, and I want to present this question in front of the body concerning the option to have placed this stream of revenue on the market.
Right.
I've listened to, you know, some other presentations that have suggested that we could receive more money, you know, upfront
Right.
at you know, a rate that, you know, we'll understand what the rate is now. It won't be, you know, floating. And they believe, you know, that, and I understand people, you know, have different perspectives. It's all based on, you know, their educated guess at that time, their hypothesis. But they believe that having put it on the market may have yielded, you know, some better options. And this very well may be the best option.
Well, no,
right? But
I will say,
yeah.
as we said then, the city could absolutely positively borrow more money. We don't think that's in the city's best interest at this time. The flexibility, and again, this is the basis of our recommendation, is important. Number one, the flexibility we think is very important. Number two, if more money were borrowed, more dollars would be needed for debt service. And two things would happen, neither of which we think is good for the city given its current financial position. One is most of the collections would need to be utilized for debt service. What we have always stated and had negotiated with the bank while we were still negotiating with them was that the city reserve about $10 million at all times, not to be used for debt service, ideally just sitting there as a pot for emergency things that, you know, they may not want to borrow for. If you borrow too much more than, at the time it was $80 million, that reserve would go away and it would have to be used for debt service. And we don't think, given that the reserve is not that great right now, that it's a good use of funds to plow it toward debt service. It takes away your Christmas savings fund.
Well, I was just gonna add one thing to that, you know, is sort of the longer term perspective in thinking about the commission. The city is so far behind on general maintenance of the infrastructure that if you allocate too much money to, whether it's to debt service or to any specific project, I know we've talked amongst in these meetings about, you know, we need a consistent application of dollars over an extended period of time to make a difference. You know, whoever the next mayor is, or 3 mayors from now, there still needs to be a revenue stream that continues, because the city doesn't have another revenue stream other than this one allocated for infrastructure. And so anyway, all I'm saying is, you know, when I think about all this, it's like you don't want to take up too much. It's like you're saying, taking up too much money with a borrowing that doesn't give you money to keep paving streets every year.
Right, and it doesn't allow you to build the reserve. And Mayor, we did look at, like I said, the 10 that we received, and we ran numbers on our own. And quite frankly, had this bank not come in with a rate tied to LIBOR, we may have considered that, but.
So let me say this,
Okay,
because I don't believe that you necessarily answered my question.
okay,
Right? My question wasn't one of whether we borrow more money.
Okay.
Right? I believe that that may be some options. My question was to get more put it on the market so that you can get more proposals of what is the best option for the city to go in, right?
Okay, then and I'm sorry, I have to ask you to clarify what you mean by put it on the market.
Put it on the market to see if there, let me back up off of it. Let me back up off of it and say this.
Do an RFP or something?
Yeah. But the concern that I have with the way it is presently, and like I said, it may be the best thing. I'm not so stuck in my view of things that I'm not willing to recognize reason, right? But the potential that we have under the way it's currently situated is that we borrow money, right? Under this line of credit. We obviously want, depending on what we borrow, right? We don't have the money to pay it back, right? And so we're at the bank's mercy based on this floating rate that's going to come. And we don't get the biggest bang for our buck. We don't get the very best out of, because we're at their mercy in terms of what rates they attach us to, right?
No.
Okay, explain.
It's a negotiation. So they have proposed rates tied to LIBOR. The city could come back and say LIBOR is fine, but we want to buy an interest rate cap, or we want to do something else to guarantee that the rate doesn't rise above a certain level. It is absolutely a negotiation. We haven't gotten that far. We didn't have an opportunity to get that far. But just because it was presented does not mean that the city has to enter into it. All we're saying is, and I hear you.
We got to do something.
Right. Well, you want to do something.
Yeah.
You could continue to do what you're doing right now. All we're saying is, of what was presented to us, plus a privatization bill that we were told to disregard at that time, this is what we think was in the best interest of the city. It's not final.
That's good, keeping that in the back.
And there's also was I told, what was the position that this was no longer on the table at this
That was
time?
supposed to be one of my 3 questions.
Yeah.
I had 3 questions.
I mean, because all this could be for naught.
Well-
Yeah, that was gonna be one of my 3 questions, Mayor.
When the
There was a Fisher cut date deadline.
there was a Fisher cut date deadline.
What happened to that?
And on a trip for another client to New York, I sat down with the bank, who watches Jackson News like any resident, and told them that, everyone, all parties involved, including the development bank, needed more time. And they said, okay, and it's still, I think we received a request for an update last Friday, so we'll provide them with one tomorrow. So it is still out there.
That does not mean we absolutely could do it, but it doesn't mean that it's dead.
It is not
If
dead.
I'm reading it right.
We could go back to where we
Yeah, I mean, I'm
were.
like-
I'm learning like you are.
And before you go, because I want to, just the way that it's structured now, you made the comment that it's likely to be $49 to $50 million that's actually needed. What is that based on?
That's based on, and I keep trying to turn this over to Nick. That's based on conversations that we have had, our firm has had, with the Department of Public Works, based on upcoming projects, et cetera, et cetera.
That's where my question.
So it limits, it's really still bringing us, it's shrinking the universe of work we can do.
But we don't have any control. The bank has said, this particular bank has said the number can go up to $80 million. The size has shrunk in conversations with the department. If the determination is made that the number is 79.5, those dollars are available.
But Robbie, you said but your opinion is that 80 is too much for the city.
We don't have an opinion on the amount.
Oh, you don't? Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, but if you sign this deal with J.P. Morgan,
Mhm.
We
who would
could,
like, I have to interrupt,
We
would
can't
like
use
their
their name.
name, you're right.
we can't use the name, excuse me, I'm sorry. With the bank, a big bank.
Go back.
Big bank.
Big bank.
Okay. If we sign this, the city signed this deal with the bank, you could borrow $62.31 million if that's what we end up deciding between now and 2 years from now. Or it could stop at whatever. And
2 years, not 3.
two, yeah, okay. And this whole thing about this Tiger, I want to hear some more about that, but not necessarily this meeting, because I don't know why you borrowed 19 and pay back 19 when it's going to be a few $1 million every month. I mean, I don't understand that. That's a whole other issue. My question and my concern about this whole thing, I like it better than $50 million. As I've said in this meeting several times before, I am definitely in favor of municipal borrowing. My son makes a good living at that.
I know you're
So-
saying.
We know.
I know you do.
We know.
I'm not gonna come out and be against borrowing money by municipalities, so, as long as it's reasonable and needed, so
Right.
I'm not fighting that. And this sounds a whole lot better now than it did to me a few months ago when we weren't hearing it direct, we were hearing it indirect. My concern is this, and I say this to you, in favor of them. My concern is, do we have a staff in the Public Works Department, enough staff in the Public Works Department to handle the $50 million more worth of money? I want to see you, when you get there, be able to hire, and I know what this problem is. I mean, you got all these problems about why you can't hire enough people. And I'm not saying it negative about any of these people here. I'm just saying how few people there are up there, and can they handle this much money right now thrown in at them? That's a concern of mine. I
So the
don't,
question, answer the question is yes.
well,
Because the same folks that are handling multi-millions of dollars each year on these projects, including overseeing even the work that we had with the program manager, they're on staff.
okay, I'm
Just
I'm
wanna
adding,
throw it out
I'm taking that much and adding another $50 million on top of it. It's just a question, raising it as an issue, maybe, that's fine, that's your job, that's what you asked.
Yeah,
for.
that's a question
That's what you asked for.
I'll, you know.
Yeah. The second
Not
thing
respond
is,
to.
yeah, I'm not asking you to respond to it. The second one is this list of projects. You know, once we sit down and say, okay, let's talk about this borrowing, if we want to do this or something else or whatever else, you know, the discussion about what projects are we going to do with it. As you said a minute ago, that $48 million is something that came up with Public Works, but this commission has not had any discussion with that.
You actually have.
Well-
Just to be honest,
This commission has never
the
voted to
issue,
spend.
the issue that you had, what was already committed to, I think Charles referred to earlier in the meeting, there are construction dollars that will be needed for those projects.
If
We are
wait,
not
excuse
looking
me,
beyond that.
let me finish this. Yes, we are, looking at this very document. This commission has never voted to spend any dollars on Main Street Bridge. The money for that engineering was done out of the emergency fund. That's $8 or $9 or $10 million. It's listed in this list. This commission has never talked about it, except just gotten a briefing about we're doing engineering on it. I'm not saying I'm against the Main Street Bridge, I'm just saying that we never had that discussion. All those others, we're talking about, we want to have some discussion because those costs have gone up from those wild numbers that we got when we started, that we've all admitted had no reality involved with them, which was construction that's attached to those engineering contracts. That's what we were talking about a little while ago. We wanted to have that discussion. I'm not looking to split hairs. I'm just saying that as the idea about borrowing money goes, I would think that one of the things that ought to go along with it is, what are we going to spend it on? And that's my only comment.
I think what I was saying is, going back several meetings ago, when we were having this discussion, when things kind of halted as far as do we spend on Tiger versus these other projects that we had unfinished, because Ted had that comment back then. And some of this goes back even to last October, I think, when we had Robbie present to talk about the leveraging. All of that kind of got held up. But I think the potential for that discussion was there in several meetings.
So we have never voted to spend $10 more million on Tiger. In fact, we've said we weren't. And that's part of this money. And so while it's thrown in there, that decision has not been looked at by this group. We talked about all the problems and issues with it, but that, we actually didn't vote on the $3 million or $4 million, but it's kind of an implied statement we said a long time ago we would do. But no, we have not discussed that.
The potential for, let me just say this, the department has a responsibility to get the projects done to the best of our ability regardless. So naturally, we have discussed that these are potential projects that the commission was aware of. Now, the specifics of discussing it for what you will or will not spend from a programmatic standpoint, that may not have happened, but you still are going back to the May 2015 approved projects that we're working with.
Which we said we want to go look at that list and revise. Which we said we need better information because those numbers on there were crap. And they didn't have any sense of reality and we want to look at it. And I'll throw one more into it right now. Those are the last mayor's priorities. I don't know if that's still going to be the priority. I mean, I don't have any enough information, not that I would necessarily defer.
But it all ties back into why reconciling what's on the table is the process.
I just say, before we sit there and say, let's go borrow some money, I would like to have a discussion about to spend on what.
So let me tell you, my whole purpose for even playing devil's advocate in terms of the questions I'm asking is that I feel that most things in life are a battle of information. And anyone who has the information is usually better prepared to do what they need to do. And so I'm just proposing that as Robbie has come and informed us, that we just arm ourselves with more information and options that we can explore, right? And then from there, see where we're most comfortable with doing it, right? Mr. Ducksworth, you had a question. You made a statement a moment ago, and could you just repeat because I noted in my head that I wanted to say something about it, but I don't remember what exactly you said.
Which question?
You have it down.
About maybe not leveraging all the money now.
You talking about the long-term application of the revenue stream?
Yes, yeah.
Well, I mean, just, from the standpoint of the thing that I assume everybody in this room hears as a resident of the city of Jackson or somebody just passing through the city of Jackson, the biggest complaint we hear is the roads and how bad they are. So paving is what people, I know that's not what Public Works is probably worried about. They're worried about a water line somewhere that can't get somebody water for a business or a home. But anyway, that being said, it's like, how do we consistently apply something? I think when we passed that master plan at the last meeting, the idea was that some component, I think we said half of the revenue, that we were going to pave streets. That we just needed, and maybe we only did that for a few years, and then all of a sudden if you're doing 40 miles a year for 3 years, then everybody goes, we can take a break. Everybody's not screaming like they were. And so that really just a consistent application. I know somebody said the other day, may have been you, that we have staggered terms for us as commissioners, and the idea is, there's elections every 4 years, there's staggered commissioners, but there's a plan that's approved that's being applied over time. And it sort of felt like, and maybe it's just because there was so much when we got started, it was all just right here in our face. We got to do this stuff right now. And I'd just like to take a little longer approach at it. And so people can see progress, but they're also whittling away at the program. I mean, we're making some progress every year, but we're also got longer term things on there. So does that answer your, clarify?
So yours is, if you allow me to kind of simplify it.
Sure.
Yours is a more far-reaching, view of how we approach this, and how we deal with the maintenance. And I believe that if you don't have a plan for tomorrow, you'll always be struggling now, right? And so as I look at this, I definitely think that we can't neglect to have a plan for how we'll deal with maintenance going forward. I don't believe that if you got money up front, that you have to spend just because you have it in the bank, that you got to spend it all, right? You can. It's still within, it's still up to us to determine how we utilize those funds. But I think you also have to take this view of it as well, that, if some of this work continues to be neglected, right now, then the problem isn't going anywhere, it's growing. The expense is growing, right? So when we get down the road, right, we'll find a bigger monster than we would have found had we addressed some of that. And the view is also, how are we going to look at these projects as an opportunity to grow revenue, as an opportunity to grow the purse for the 1% commission, right? And so, that's why I believe the potential of attacking more work up front could potentially create the opportunity to grow the purse down the line, right? And so it's how do you want to invest? How do you want to invest? Safely, right? Or aggressively? And what are going to be your yields based on it, right?
So if I may add, I think, and I don't want to speak for everyone, but I think most of us around the table don't have any consternation with leveraging the money. I mean, that was never the issue. It's understanding, what that looked like and what it would be spent on, and hoping, we hope going forward that that's something that we can clearly communicate to each other, because we do have a fiduciary duty. So I know Robbie had been very bullish about reaching out to us individually to say, hey, what's going on. But I think there was a general consensus, to your point of, information is power. We didn't have the information. We were being bullied to make a decision without
I wasn't bullying.
Well, you weren't. But I mean, we were being bullied to make a decision without even having the benefit of the information.
Yeah. I will say, just for the record, I do have some reservations about leveraging the money. And I hear what you're saying, and respect that, and I feel much better after hearing from you. I wish we had heard from you earlier.
Me too.
Yeah.
You're very impressive.
She was actually here to talk to us in the March meeting, but she got overrun with other issues.
Well, that's too bad. We appreciate you being here. But my concern is that if we do spend or commit a lot of the money, that 3-4 years from now, we're going to have money to operate. Because it's not a lot of money. I mean, $15 million only goes so far.
You said 50?
15. I'm sorry.
15. Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Only go, I understand that.
Yeah.
But it seems like so many of our problems, or a lot of our problems, are just very basic, like potholes.
You make it sound so easy.
Can we fill some? But we just don't. I know there are a lot of them, but there are a lot of them that keep growing. And utility cuts. I mean, there's some utility cuts that are just. There's one on my street that I go over every day. There's one on Ridgewood that I swear it gets lower every day. It's turning into a speed bump. So
my office is on Ridgewood.
yeah, well, you know the one I'm talking about.
I heard people complimenting you on getting your road paved as soon as you got elected.
Yeah,
got
people
your road
been
paved right
complimenting me
away.
on
I want to
things,
congratulate you on that.
Well, I personally just think job number one needs to be to build on the public works department, on the work that Charles and his team done, so that you've just got a team that can handle the work. And then, if we have some big projects, we talk about, leveraging the money, but just taking care of the basics, the potholes, the utility cuts. And once we've got that covered, we can look at bigger, projects, the $35 million projects. Just my opinion.
I received that.
But I totally understand what you're saying about growing the pie. I mean, that's the important thing is, we get, $12 to $14 million a year now. If we can grow the economy in the city and make it $20 million a year, then we can do a lot more.
And as the economic developer of the commission, I would say you've got to do that. As soon as you do it, and that's why I do like the idea of leveraging. Because if we don't do it soon, we're going to continue to lose things every time we turn around.
Right.
People moving out, or people choosing from outside to go someplace else as well.
And if we're just trying to fix this thing piecemeal over time, that's exactly what's going to happen. We'll have less money to deal with as time goes on. And to tie or segue into this whole Tiger Grant thing, that's one of the things that makes it an important project now, because it has the opportunity to create a corridor that, we could potentially, find new space for economic development, right? Now, that's a simple way of saying it. Obviously you got to find the money. How is it going to happen? I was encouraged to find out that all of the money does not have to, necessarily come up front, and how it still doesn't mean that we've found all the money, but that is encouraging to know, because my main concern was feeling that we were going to be pressured into making a decision on the 90 million or the credit line, the line of credit, for the purposes of the Tiger Grant.
Well, and that's why we reached out to the feds and the state and dug deeper on the city to make sure that we understood that as well. I just want to say one thing and then I'll be finished. We are not suggesting that this is the sum total of what's needed. If we were purely mercenary, we'd say, yeah, let's borrow $500 million right now. We'd make a lot more money. But we are suggesting that within the time frame within which bond proceeds have to be spent, this makes sense. If it were me, our recommendation would be get the whatever is available, use it wisely, and in somewhere 18 months to 2 years, the credit position looks better because you have another 2 years of sales tax collection history. You have a bigger reserve, and then your availability at that point is much larger, and this is what's important, at a lower cost of interest because the credit rating is better than it would be making a big borrowing right now.
You made the comment there about this project that gets committed. If it's borrowed in that 2 years, does it have to be committed in that 2 years?
Yes.
All right, here's my concern about what I was saying a while ago. May of 2015, we approved Brook Hollow Circle, a little $600,000 drainage ditch, and the contract's going to be approved by the city council 2.5 years later. How in the world are you going to get Main Street Bridge, a $9 million project, ready to do that?
Well, no, now that's for bond proceeds.
I'm talking about do they have to be committed to a project at that time?
That part, and I know I've used this word a lot, is also negotiable.
My understanding is right now it had to be spent that 2 year period. I know it's negotiable, everything's negotiable.
Right. If the city borrows, let's make it simple, $10 million on January 1, and $2 million is supposed to be used for Pete Perry's house.
Oh, good. Good.
That's gonna be a problem.
That would be a problem, but assuming it was not, and let's say that happens on Jan 1 or happened on Jan 1 of 17. By Jan 1 of 19, those funds have to be committed to Pete Perry's house and X% have to be spent.
Do they have to have a contract in place for Jonathan Lee, a $2 million contract for Jonathan Lee to come work on my house?
It depends on, again, the
When you talk about
negotiation
committed,
part.
When you
Yeah.
talk about committed, we want to ask you what's committed.
It can either be
Because I don't
there,
know that we can get that money committed in this period of time. We have not proven that with most things we've done over the last 2 years, because we've only spent $9, $10, $12 million of the $40 million that we've approved. You know, over two years, and most of that's because we did these 2 big street projects.
oh, I see your concern.
Yeah, we done APAC and Superior, that's $15 million. The rest of it's still sitting over here in the bank. Committed to those projects, but, you know, they're just kind of still in the design, they're still in this and they're still in that. I mean, that's just my concern about.
I think that's gonna be a big part of trying to figure out how we can, I mean, that's part of your administrative process, I think. How do we speed up the process?
There's so many reasons, I'd love to respond to that, but there's so many reasons that I shouldn't right now.
That's right. I didn't ask for a response.
Earlier, I heard a process being put in place that we can have a model that we can track this. We can look at the ones that's been approved and where we are on that.
Right.
If we put these in place and we're starting anew, we can have more accountability in here, we can be focused, and we don't have to have our meetings just get off track by trying to get these things, because they'll be there before us.
Well, we wouldn't.
And we would waste this kind of, yeah, and we'll keep everybody focused on this because this is what we said we're gonna do, this is where we are, you ask that accountability. So I don't think that we should get bottleneck about what has been, let's look at what can be.
Right. I think that's a good point, because we have, I mean, we spend, let's face it, we've spent so much time around this table, or tables that we've met on, that are the same discussions each and every time we come in here. And it would be so good to be able to put it all together. And again, I'm advocating, I think we should do as much as possible. And just, you know, this commission I think can work that out. I think we can figure out what we want to do with that much money and what the priority list is and go and figure out how much we want to do. It shouldn't be that hard.
Shouldn't be that hard.
I feel that we have some big brains in the room that we should be able to.
This is all about accountability.
Yeah.
I appreciate you coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rob.
Very good.
Both of you, thanks.
Thank you.
That's very, very important.
Mr. Chairman, I have a technical question. If we do business.
With what?
If we do business,
No.
I'll save mine for them.
I don't know.
Is this the remarks period of time?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mark, that's you.
Is that me?
That's
All
you.
right. Well, first and foremost, I thank y'all for allowing me to join you today. It's been informative. I've enjoyed our discussion. And I want to let you know how I view approaching this commission. One, I respect the responsibility that you have to offer yourself or to allow yourself to be utilized in this regard. It says a lot about how much you care for this city and how important you find this city. So I thank you for that. And you know, I know that your bank accounts aren't loaded from the time that you spend here. So it truly is a sacrifice. And I want to do all that I can to you know, make your responsibility easier. I believe in the process of unity, debate unity. I believe that we can all come in this room and identify where we see eye to eye, debate where we may have differences with the objective of reaching greater unity at the end of the day. So I believe that sincere people can have sincere disagreements. So when I ask questions of Robbie, you know, I'm not, you know, I'm not, you know, disputing her sincerity. I'm just putting on the table other things to consider so that we can see and measure out what is the best course. And so I look forward to, you know, the work. I think everyone knows your names because everyone's concerned about the potholes. But I believe that, you know, we have the opportunity to do some really great work in the city so that everyone can appreciate, you know, the time that you've offered in order to benefit this city. And so that's what I think is important. I'm really hopeful of what we can all accomplish together. And I promise what you have my commitment to is that you'll never find that I'll disagree with you because there's some ulterior motive behind it. You know, I'm going to give you my honest perspective. I'm going to be honest with you. And I am willing to yield to what makes sense. You know, I won't be so firm in my position that if something, you know, obviously and honestly makes better sense, that I won't yield to that. And so I'm excited. It's a lot that I have to catch up on. It's a lot that I have to grow to understand, like anyone else taking the position. And so I'll do my due diligence to get up to speed as soon as possible. But I'm glad to see that we have so many people here today, and I look forward to it. Okay.
Well, we truly appreciate you coming. It's been a workshop, but it's been one of the best candid meetings, informative meetings that I think we've had in a long time. So
And friendly.
And friendly. We have
Absolutely.
Carrot, wouldn't you say?
What?
Friendly meeting.
You've been well behaved.
I'm always well behaved.
But
You can define
As the
behave.
mayor-elect said,
in all seriousness, though, this
As
is,
the mayor-elect said, just because we disagree, certainly you can disagree, but
Sure.
disagreement doesn't mean you're not friendly.
absolutely, well,
And I just see the disagreement and what has transpired as everybody's passion for the city.
No, and I also want to thank the people who work every day for the city. Thank y'all so much, and the sacrifices y'all make. So I didn't want to leave that out.
we do.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is exciting. This, talking about how we can jump out there and do more, talk about how we're going to know what we've done and what we haven't done. Just that alone is going to get us down the road from where we've been stuck for a while. So I'm sitting here feeling more optimistic than I've felt in some time. I hope the rest of the committee feels that way as well. Any last comments? other than Pete.
Our next meeting is scheduled for July the 5th, and traditionally, we've not met because that's the week of July the 5th. I would like to suggest that we move it forward 1 week,
Yeah.
because Wednesday, we're scheduled to meet the first Wednesday of every month. We could certainly change that, but that's our current.
And we have moved
Swearing
on.
in.
Swearing in is July 3rd, but I was informed today of some other things that may be happening with the council on July 5th. And so
That's why I think, that's another reason I think it'd be a good idea.
They're asking if they might change the meeting to Thursday, July the 6th or something, or something.
For this one,
I just got,
or your-
no, this is the city council meeting. They may move the city
That's
council
my
meeting, but I don't know.
I just think that we've done it before. I think moving forward 1 week is a wise thing, because
A lot of folks-
we've not even had swearing ins before. It's just the holiday week and people being gone. So with all the other stuff going on, I think it's even more important.
Would everybody be amenable to meeting the following week?
12th.
The 12th?
Are you moving it back?
No, it'd be
I changed my schedule.
it's the 13th, I believe.
No, whatever the second Wednesday.
Whatever.
It's
second one.
July 12th. You're talking about Wednesday, July 12th.
Yeah.
If you go back to your offices and find out that that's a terrible day, let's try and work it the right day. Because it's good when we've got everybody here.
And I don't think we ought to go the month without meeting.
I'm good the week of the
I'm just
12th.
looking over here, but we're not gonna go without the meeting.
Yeah, so I think just setting it now and getting, because I know we're not gonna meet on the 5th, we never do.
Say what?
I'm good the week of the 12th.
Good.
I'm good.
Week following
You're
that,
good.
I'm
You're
on
good.
vacation.
Yeah.
I'm good.
I'm good.
You're good.
I'm good.
Jonathan?
I'll know in a minute.
let me call you.
I'll know when I get back. Well, I won't.
I could meet on the 10th or the 11th, but
Okay.
I'll be on a plane to Honduras on the 12th.
Honduras.
We can all
Infrastructure
go.
problems they got.
Yeah, we can all go down.
Yeah.
Row
I'll make myself available. Give me a
I wish it was Roatan.
It will be again at 2 o'clock.
Yeah, and then,
So it is July 12th.
I mean, I don't have to be here, obviously, for everybody to meet. John and Pete and I have some homework to do before the next meeting, so.
you do.
I'm not opposed to moving it to the 11th, but that would be
Hang on a
good.
second.
What was yours?
What days of peak? I mean,
That's the,
what'd you say?
Either the 10th or the 11th, which is Monday or Tuesday.
I've never seen a format.
She said 11th too, if it's better.
Right now, it's good.
11th is good for me.
Yeah, it's good for me. Nobody pay me.
Are you okay on the 11th?
Yeah.
Uh,
July